Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. 6 more Palestinians have died of starvation and malnutrition in Gaza, raising the toll to 175, including 93 children. The humanitarian crisis deepens as Egypt prepares to deliver fuel to the enclave, while Israeli fire kills 40 more people, with some trying to reach aid hubs, according to reports from the region. The Israeli military conducted a raid in southern Syria, seizing weapons and questioning several suspects involved in weapons trafficking. The raid took place on Saturday, according to Israeli officials. Egypt has sent 2 fuel trucks carrying 107 tons of diesel to Gaza as the region faces severe fuel shortages, impacting hospital services. Gaza's health ministry has reported that fuel lacks have forced doctors to prioritise critical patients. Armed groups attacked Syria's internal security forces in Sawida, killing 1 officer and injuring others in the attack. It violated a ceasefire agreed last month in the Druze region, which had already seen fierce factional clashes, resulting in hundreds of deaths. Gunmen kidnapped more than 50 people in a mass abduction in Sabon Garin Damri in Zamfara state in Nigeria. The attack is the latest in a region struggling with gangs that kidnap for ransom, loot villages and demand taxes. A Russian missile strike on the Mykolaiv region in southern Ukraine injured at least 7 people and damaged dozens of homes and civilian infrastructure. 2 of the injured were hospitalized after the late Saturday attack, according to the regional governor. Iran's military commander-in-chief stated that threats from Israel remain, stressing the importance of taking every threat seriously. This comes after the Israel-US strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities in June and Tehran's retaliatory missile and drone attacks. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has expressed profound shock over videos showing 2 emaciated hostages in Gaza. The European Union also condemned the clips and called for the immediate release of all remaining hostages. Now we start this hour in Europe, where US Special Presidential Envoy Steve Witkoff is in Moscow this weekend, according to US Permanent Representative to NATO Matt Whitaker. In an interview with NBC News, Whitaker expressed hope that Witkoff's visit could lead to a breakthrough in ongoing discussions. Whitaker emphasized the US goal of securing a deal between both sides and noted that Witkoff's presence in Russia might yield positive results. Witkoff's trip to Russia follows a visit to Israel and the Gaza Strip earlier this month as part of efforts to mediate in the region. The special envoy has made several trips to Moscow recently, where he has met with Russian President Vladimir Putin. We're now joined by Ross Feingold, who's a political analyst. He joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan to give us more detail on this. Ross, thank you very much, as always, for joining us. Ross, can we dive a little bit into Steve Witkoff, his experience in negotiating conflicts, how he's been doing since the Trump presidency in Donald Trump's large foreign policy aims, that being ending the Ukraine war and ending the war in the Middle East in Gaza. Can you tell us a bit more about who Steve Witkoff is, his past experience, and your analysis on how you think he's doing in negotiating these conflicts?
His past experiences as a real estate investor in the New York City area, that's what he's known for. And that's the connection that he has to President Trump. They've known each other for decades, both being real estate tycoons in New York City, in the New York City area. So frankly, he has no on-point experience with international diplomacy or negotiating ceasefires or peace in conflict zones. He's a businessman, and specifically, he's a real estate guy, just like President Trump. That being said, one of the most important tools that an American ambassador or special envoy in this case can bring to foreign countries is that they have a direct line to the president. And in this case, when countries interact with Witkoff, whether that's interlocutors like Qatar and Egypt, which work with the United States to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza, or directly with parties that are conflict to a war like Russia, the other side knows that when they're speaking to Witkoff, they are speaking to somebody who has a direct line into the United States president. And that's extremely useful in moving negotiations along. Now, to be fair to Witkoff, it seems like the parties that he's been dealing with during the 6 months that he's had this role, they're willing to work with him. We don't see or hear or read criticism from the other parties, the other countries, about Witkoff, or they don't say Witkoff lied to them or he went back on his word or anything like that. So it's clear that Witkoff has developed a rapport with the people he's dealing with, and that allows him to facilitate these various negotiations.
Ross, just a couple of months ago, Witkoff was criticised for an interview that he gave where he sounded like he was sympathising quite a lot with the Russian cause and it appeared to some critics that he had a particular fondness to Vladimir Putin. How do you analyse this relationship between the Russian president and the US envoy? Obviously, when we see them greet each other, they greet with a handshake and smiles. Sometimes we've seen a hug between the two. Given the escalating tensions now and visible frustration that Donald Trump has shown with the Russian president, do you think that relationship will change?
That's a very good question. One thing to keep in mind is that when Witkoff said such nice things about Putin after his first interactions with Putin, that was at a time when President Trump was also generally saying nice things about Putin as well. So of course Witkoff's going to be consistent with his boss, President Trump. But also just as a matter of negotiating strategy, Witkoff probably realizes that there's no benefit for him to go into the international media and say bad things about Putin, because he knows that that's just not going to bring about a ceasefire or a longer-term peace between Ukraine and Russia. So part of this is also negotiating strategy as well. And again, I think it's worth noting that it appears that the Russians, and specifically President Putin, they're willing to work with Witkoff. So Witkoff has established this rapport. It hasn't brought about a ceasefire arrangement yet. There's going to have to be some concessions from the Ukrainian side as well. Everybody knows that. There's no denying that. But it's not something that Zelensky is willing to agree to, at least not yet. But as far as the interactions between Witkoff and Putin, at least for now, it's positive, and that facilitates ongoing talks.
Yes, Ross, thank you very much. You are staying with us to discuss further developments from the Ukrainian conflict. A massive fire has broken out at an oil depot near Sochi, Russia, with authorities blaming a Ukrainian drone attack for the blaze. Russian officials say drone debris struck a fuel tank, sparking the fire, which 127 firefighters are currently battling. Meanwhile, Russia has also launched a missile strike on Ukraine's southern city of Mykolaiv, injuring at least 7 civilians. The attack on Sochi is part of a broader series of drone strikes by Ukraine over the weekend, which targeted several southern Russian cities, including Ryazan, Penza and Voronezh. Russia's defense ministry reported intercepting 93 Ukrainian drones overnight. The strikes come after a deadly week for civilians in Ukraine, including an attack on Kiev that killed 31 people. In response, Ukrainian President Zelensky called for stronger international sanctions on Russia, while US President Trump has condemned Russia's actions and hinted at new sanctions. We're once again joined by Ross Feingold to discuss the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war. Ross, there's a lot of speculation here. A lot of people think that Russia has firmly won this war. However, we still see Ukraine sending over drones, sending over aerial attacks. What are your thoughts of the current military capabilities of Ukraine?
it appears that, at least in the regions of eastern Ukraine that Russia occupies, that Ukraine is generally unable to recapture their lost territory. And in fact, Russia makes very incremental, very small territorial gains as the weeks and months go by. Again, it should be emphasized that Russia does make gains, but they are very slow and come at a very large cost in injured and killed personnel, as well as equipment that gets damaged or lost. So at least in the key territories for Ukraine, they're not able to retake them. However, we also know that Ukraine's ability to manufacture drones domestically has continued to improve. And this allows Ukraine to carry out attacks like has occurred over the past few hours. And that ability is only going to improve even more as they gain more, as the Ukrainians gain more experience, as they fix things that don't work, they make improvements to their drones. They're certainly going to improve this ability to hit Russian military or energy facilities beyond the border. But again, it's not going to change the facts on the ground in the eastern Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia.
Yes, and Ross, obviously, Donald Trump's growing frustration with the Russian president, as we briefly discussed earlier. Obviously, this deadline is looming of the possibility of further sanctions on Moscow. How effective of a tool will that be in leverage in peace talks, in the possibility of ending this war? What kind of issues economically are Russia facing that will make these sanctions a powerful weapon, or will do next to nothing?
If the United States, at the end of this deadline period imposed by President Trump, were to only sanction specific Russian companies, financial institutions, individuals, business leaders, political leaders, that's probably not going to change any policy or war-fighting strategy of President Putin. Generally, the only thing that would have a huge effect on Russia would be this proposal that's been in the United States Congress to impose huge sanctions on countries that buy Russian energy, and specifically that would be India and China. President Trump at times has seemed supportive of that proposal. At times he seemed to back off of that support. But really the only way to hurt Russia financially is going to be to get India and China to stop their purchases of Russian energy. But as of this moment, it doesn't seem that President Trump is going in that direction, but he might change his mind and he might pursue that.
Yes, Ross Feingold, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure to get your insight here on the programme. For our next story, we move over to the Middle East, where in Syria's southern Sawida province, fresh violence has broken out. State-run Ekbaria TV reports that armed groups attacked members of the country's internal security forces, killing one and wounding others. Shells were also fired at multiple villages, violating a recently agreed ceasefire in the mostly Druze region. The clashes first flared on July the 13th, where Druze factions and tribal groups over long-standing tensions. Despite a US-brokered truce, violence continues to escalate. Government troops were deployed earlier, and Israel carried out strikes on Syrian forces, citing support for Druze communities. We're now joined by Ali M. Bushback. He's a Middle East researcher. He joins us live from Cairo. Ali, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Ali, what are your thoughts on the current state of Syria? Obviously, this fragile truce is holding in the south. However, what are your thoughts on the fragility, it seems, of the state of Syria right now?
Thank you, Joshua, for having me. The situation in Syria is very terrible, especially challenging the current president, Ahmed al-Shara. In north and south, there is a clashes between the army that belongs to Ahmed al-Shara Yesterday night, there is in northern part of Syria, in Kast especially, there is a clashes, and there is around five army. Syrian army has been killed, and several of people who got injured. Particularly, Joshua, this kind of places in northern part of Syria based for the Syrian Democratic Forces, and the significant enemy for Ahmad al-Shara and for Salafism in Syria, and used to supported by also the previous regime for the Bashar al-Assad. And today also the fragile ceasefire between the minority Durzes and the Truce and the Arab who was attacking this area, especially in Suwaida. It's representing how much Ahmad al-Shara it's representing how much Ahmad al-Shara doesn't respect the minority in the region. Especially here is these two significant minority in Syria, especially Durzes and Kurdish, who's always fighting for and demanding for their rights and for civilians' rights, and they're asking for self-determination, while Ahmad al-Shara, they're attacking them and forcing them to be quiet and silent. Simultaneously, Durzes supported by Israel and also Syrian Defense Forces. It's supported by Western countries and supported by a previous Syrian regime. That make it clashes, and it's exacerbated the situation on the ground, which hugely challenging Ahmad al-Shara to tolerate it and handle this kind of situation, and the clashes between the troop and the militant in Syria, especially after the fall of the previous regime, and the Israelis attack for the Damascus last month, when Israel's bombardment the significant site for the regime and for the Syrian army. That's make it more terrible, the situation, and up to now the situation is boiling in north and south Syria, especially between the minorities and between the current regime. As I mentioned, the Druze minority, they are confronted with the army, the current army supported by Ahmad al-Shara, and also the Kurdish minority, they are supported, they are confronting with Ahmad al-Shara. Both of them, they have a supporter which make it more difficult to maintain the human rights and maintain the calm in the region. And I guess now Ahmad al-Shara is suffering from this part of community and from this minority. We are waiting to see how he is going to handle it, but I guess the situation is going to escalate it more and more. And while the fire of fighting, and while the tragedy of fighting between the minority has been come, and we are witnessing in every week there is some clashes and there is some casualties from both sides.
Yes, Ali, thank you very much. You are staying with us to discuss further updates from the region. Now we move over to the region's defining crisis, the war in Gaza, where 36 aid trucks entered the enclave yesterday, Palestinian officials have claimed. Officials say at least 600 truckloads of aid were needed daily, adding the population's needs are worsening. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refutes the claims and accuses Hamas of stirring up a slanderous propaganda campaign against Israel. He says the cruelty of Hamas has no boundaries, while the state of Israel allows humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. Hamas terrorists deliberately starve our hostages and document it in a cynical and evil way. The terrorists of Hamas also deliberately starve the residents of the Strip by preventing them from receiving any aid. Those are the words of the Israeli Prime Minister there. We are joined by, once again, Ali Mohammed Bushback to discuss this further. Ali, what are your thoughts on the statement, which is continued by Benjamin Netanyahu and also members of his government and his cabinet, that there is no starvation in Gaza and that Hamas is looting all of the aid from these trucks? What is your analysis of that statement there?
Joshua, the situation on the ground is completely behind the imagination. It's a terrible and I mean, it's a very tough to tolerate such kind of famine and starvation in Gaza. 36 of the trucks and aid trucks to enter Gaza is not sufficient, and especially this kind of report leaked by, it's by the international organization that they are moderating between Palestinian and Israel and neutral in this conflict. Especially, we are talking about United Nations, we are talking about a Human Rights Watch, and we are talking about several of international community who's issued this kind of report, especially on the ground. The situation is terrible. I've talked to several of civilians in Gaza, and I asked them about the market. They confirmed there is no vegetable in market. There is no supplies in market. Worth mentioning that, Joshua, most of the track that into Gaza, it's looted by civilians, the hunger civilians, and militant gangs people. That's make it unjust to discriminate this aids to in the people and the civilians who's staying at their home and committed to the Israelis' order to not gathering and to not go to some sites to collect some food and some aids. So that's make it unjust to distributing the humanitarian aid in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu and his government coalition and the several of Israeli ministers, they are rejecting the notion and denying the starvation in Gaza, while I don't know that the audience should be and the witness should be, accept which story or which narrative. That way, what they are seeing on the ground, that the footage and the picture that leaking from Gaza, that representing the situation, the current situation on Gaza, the people who are suffering from starvation and malnutrition, or we should be believing Benjamin Netanyahu and his rejection and his denying for the starvation in Gaza. All the international community, Western country, there is a massive of there is a wave of protest on the ground in Western country demanding to support Palestine and end the war and for at least ceasefire in Gaza and end this kind of war and closure this chapter of conflict, which demanding for two-state solution between Palestinian and Israel as a significant solution between Palestinian and Israel.
Yes, Ali.
Benjamin Netanyahu, it seems that he's in other planet and he's thinking, despite there is even in Israel itself, there is some protest by Israeli. They are supporting Gaza.
Ali, let me just stop you there. That leads us nicely on to our next update. We stay in the region next, where Israeli protesters blocked a main Tel Aviv highway today during the morning rush hour in a call to bring back all the hostages held in Gaza. According to reports, protesters carrying huge photos of hostages took position in the middle of the highway, drumming and chanting for their release. This comes after US President Donald Trump's Middle East envoy told families of hostages being held by Hamas that he was working with the Israeli government on a plan that would effectively end the war in Gaza. Let's take a listen in to what one of the nephews of a Hamas captivity survivor said.
We came here because yesterday we saw the videos of our hostages in captivity after 666 days, looking like skeletons, and we just couldn't stay home. We want to shout and remind the Israeli public and the whole world that our brothers, these hostages, need to come home as fast as possible in a complete deal, a full deal, which will stop the war and bring back all the hostages as soon as possible.
Okay, we're looking at the opposition within Israel to the Gaza war. It turns out in reality that there is huge opposition to the war in Gaza from within Israel. A poll commissioned by Penn State in March of 2025, this was just a couple more months ago now, found that 82% of Israeli Jews supported the forced expulsion of Gaza residents. However, now most Israelis want to bring an end to the war. We're now joined by Ali Mohammed Abushbak, who joins us live from Cairo once again. Ali, thank you very much for joining us. We're currently running visuals of these protests, which are coming from inside Israel. There's staunch opposition against the war in Gaza inside Israel, however, mainly focused around the release of hostages. What are your thoughts and how do you analyse the opposition to Netanyahu's government inside Israel at this stage of the war?
Joshua, that it's worth mentioning that since the beginning of war, there is a protest and there is a weekly protest for the families of captive and for the Israelis left wing from Israel who's supporting to stop the war, and also the several of Israelis community and Israelis organization, human rights organization based in Israel. They are condemning using the starvation as a weapon in this kind of war. So the thing is, it's a natural reaction from the people whose their loved one, they are suffering from Gaza. They are suffering like civilians in Gaza from starvation and lack of food in Gaza. I guess it has a symbolic meaning. It will not make any change because since past 1 year, Israelis are protesting against this war and asking Benjamin Netanyahu to stop the war and for turning to comprehensive and a comprehensive deal with Hamas to release all the hostages in one time, not in many phases. So I guess this is a part of a protest. It's showing that how much the Israeli community as well they are frustrating from their government policy and the Israeli government coalition.
Ali Abushbak, thank you very much as always for joining us here on NewsX World. Your insight is always very much valued here on the programme. We now move on and to the Japanese Sea, where Russia and China have been conducting joint Navy drills. Russia has stated that the drills are defensive. These exercises comes just 2 days after US President Donald Trump announced that he has deployed 2 nuclear submarines in response to highly provocative remarks by former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. Despite the timing, Russian officials emphasized that the exercises were scheduled before Trump's announcement. Russia and China, allies under a no-limits partnership formed before the Ukraine war in 2022, frequently coordinate military actions to demonstrate deterrence. The US and Russia possess the largest nuclear arsenals in the world, and it remains rare for either to disclose submarine deployments. We're now joined by Ambassador Suresh Goel, who's a former diplomat. He joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ambassador Goel, for joining us here on the program. What do you think about the relationship between Russia and China, and also their decision to put these huge military drills on, coordinated together? Obviously, China claims neutrality in the Russia and Ukraine war, and actually claims neutrality in general in most conflicts around the world. However, what are your thoughts about these two partnering up in these nuclear drills, in these military drills? Apologies.
The fact is that I find that of late the challenges strategic challenges, particularly in terms of the military cooperation and the joint drills, joint maneuvers, are becoming actually more frequent, uh, and as well as they have acquired a kind of a more contest, more threatening contest, particularly because the countries have begun to take even more aggressive positions against each other. Now, you refer to Trump deploying 2 nuclear submarines in response to the remarks made by former Russian President Medvedev. He has done that. Now, the exercises had been scheduled even earlier, even before those remarks were made. So I really would not relate them to each other. But the point really here is that it does create a situation when two different sides to a possible military equation could look at each other in a threatening manner. We already know that Japanese Sea and particularly Indo-Pacific is the theater for many conflicts. Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, there are many challenges over there. South China Sea is there. And therefore, the need is to basically be more responsible and not try and create situations which can lead to military conflict. But I think that will be a utopia. That's a daydream. So I do hope that the drills which have been scheduled, they stop there are just drills. And I do hope that there will be no response from any side which can actually convert these drills into a more active military maneuver. We have to keep our eyes and ears open and just keep hoping for the best.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Suresh Goel, for giving us insight on that topic. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you for joining us.